Hi, please excuse any bad delivery, rambling, and awkward pauses. This is my first ever attempt at putting out a voiced video. This video is a tutorial and demonstration of my Precision Planner mod for Transport Fever. I know it's been a much requested feature to the developers. I was originally just playing around with working out how the game's splines worked after digging through Danny T's Parallel Fly Junction mod. After learning more about what the modding system could actually do, I started to think up ways I could build a full track planning mode. I've been working on it for a couple of months now, and I think it's just about feature complete and tested enough at this point to set it loose. I've built it solely around the unmodded vanilla game, so there aren't any extra bridge or track types, that sort of thing. I've also not tested it for compatibility with any other mods, so use at your own risk. It doesn't modify any pre-existing game assets, so hopefully it won't interfere with other mods anyway. Okay, thanks for taking the time to watch. I'll get right on with the tutorial. The mod includes two planners. Both planners are located in the passenger rail station menu. As they're considered a construction tool by the game, I can't put them in the track building menu, so I figured this was the best place to put them. As you can see, there's a rough planner and a precision track segment building tool. I've designed them to be used as a two-stage process for planning out a complete route, but they can be easily used alongside the regular track laying tools, however you feel like you want to use them. So first I'll cover how the precision planner works, then later on I'll build a complete route using both of them together. The precision planner has two primary modes: planning mode on and off, and then there's these two extra sub modes to planning mode: snap to existing and tunnel guide. With planning mode off, it'll create standard track segments directly. Like this, they can be snapped together the same way that stations are, and once they're built, they don't count as constructions, they count as valid editable track. So they can be branched off of as normal, all the usual tricks. As an aside here, this is because I'm exploiting a quirk of the construction system in the game, where building a single segment with snap points at both ends will count as a normal piece of track and actually be dropped from a construction and just dropped into the game as a regular piece. So unfortunately that means I can't do anything more than a 45-degree arc, because that requires multiple segments, but it's easy enough just to string multiple arcs together using the tool, so it all works fine. I'll get back to the shaping parameters later on. For now I'll go back to the planning mode on mode. So this will create a zero-cost planner segment that you can later upgrade to real paid track. Now, these will snap to themselves. Any shape you want to do. The snapping is actually done here by placing zero-cost dummy segments of track 10 kilometers underground, where they shouldn't get in the way of anything and they shouldn't be rendered by the game. And then when the actual planner gets deleted, the dummy track goes with it. They stay part of the construction. So then we have snap to existing sub mode. Will basically do exactly the same thing, except it places a very tiny sliver of dummy track so that you can actually snap it to existing pieces of your network. Again, those pieces of track will stay part of the construction, so they'll never be part of the network. They'll only be part of the planner. Tunnel guide mode will basically do the same planner, but place tunnel entrances at the ends. If you wish to attempt to manually create tunnels using this tool, which is a little bit awkward because it doesn't handle them for you. You basically have to judge the depth manually. The ideal is 10 meters underground, which will roughly intersect the top of the guide. If you then place tunnel on the other side of that, it should make a perfect tunnel entrance into the hillside. Again, it doesn't handle it for you, so you can certainly stick tunnel entrances sticking out of the landscape, and it'll make a bit of a visual glitch. So you just kind of have to take care of it yourself for that. Right, as I mentioned before, once you've placed a planner, it's counted as a construction by the game, so you can select it and upgrade it. This is how you convert it into usable track segments. You basically just switch from whatever planning mode to off. Unfortunately, because the replacement track isn't considered a construction, it won't actually replace the existing planner, it'll just overlay it. So once you upgrade it and pay the price for the track, you will still have to then bulldoze the planner to get rid of it, and then you're left with normal track. Now for important caveats here. As a byproduct of that quirk I mentioned earlier that I'm exploiting to do this, even though the new track segment won't be counted as part of the original planner, the construction itself will think it is. So here, if we do this, so basically, after you've done the conversion, it will charge you the cost to bulldoze the track segment, to bulldoze the planner itself, even though it's not going to bulldoze the track. I've tried everything I can to find a way around that, and I just can't work out any way to stop it doing that. So generally it's not so bad because bulldozing a track doesn't cost much. The only problem is when you build a tall bridge or a tunnel, then the bulldoze costs become quite significant, so it can cost you a lot to clean those up afterwards. So for that reason, it's usually better not to convert the planners into tall bridges or tunnels. Just use it for planning, and instead of that, just convert. I've got a demo set up over here. Basically, if you just convert the earthworks on either side, as per this, and then don't convert the tunnel segment in between, but use the regular track to drag the same piece between. It will use the normal track laying tools to create its own tunnel. I've matched the game's Hermite curve generation as precisely as I can. I think it's exact to what the game uses. So if you drag a section between two other bordering planners, then it should perfectly match where the planner is going. So then you will get your tunnel, and you can still bulldoze the planner without any cost involved. And so you end up with that kind of thing. Okay, on to the track shaping parameters. First up will be gradient. So as you probably know in the base game, if you use the normal track laying tools, you can click to fix slope and manually select gradient. Now this basically gives you three options between flat, shallow, and steep inclines. In my mod, Those slope amounts correspond to flat 3.75% and 7.5% gradients, respectively. For my tastes, 3.75 is already fairly steep in some cases. Some of the earlier trains, and if you have more heavily loaded trains, will struggle getting up that. They'll be way off their top speed. So I've split the mod down into 6 different smaller steps. So you have 1.25, 2.5, so on. It's all in 1.25 increments. So when you're doing this, you basically pick wherever the root of the planner is. The mouse cursor is the start, the other end is the end, and you have to pick a gradient for each. So flat to flat will just create a flat piece of track. If you want it to change from flat and begin an incline, you select an upward gradient at the end. If you want it to continue up the same gradient, up a hillside, you set them both to the same thing. Now, for each of the start gradient and gradient sections, everything on the top row is an upward incline from start to end, and everything on the bottom row is a downward incline. Now, as you can see, the planner shows the start and end gradients of each segment on placards at either end of the planner, along with an arrow that's aligned with the direction of the slope. The most important thing to remember here is you must make sure the gradient at the end of one segment matches the one at the start of the next one. The game won't ensure continuity for you, as it does with the regular track laying tool, at least as it mostly does with the regular track laying tool, so you have to keep tabs on it yourself. The track will still be considered valid if you don't, but you'll get a dangerous and unsightly kink in your rail, as I've demonstrated over here. So, as you can see, it's fairly simple. Just make sure one placard matches the next. So 7.7 down, 7.7 down. You'll see on the reverse they'll show up as it leads left to right. But that's what it comes down to. So as here, if you mismatch them, if we convert this back into track, and bulldoze those, you see it is still a valid piece of track, just with a hideous bend at the top of it. So it'll look very strange when trains go over it. I just want to go back and demonstrate how the Earthworks guide works. As you can see, there's 2 components, a solid blue section beneath the track and a transparent yellow section above. When you position this, you'll see that the terrain intersects both of these. The width of the section that gets cut by the terrain gives an indication of how tall an embankment or how deep a cutting a track segment will end up with. Now, if I convert these to track, you'll see that the in-game Earthworks display matches up pretty much exactly. And the same over here. Excuse me while I tidy up around here for a minute. Right, next up is the straight curve selector, which should be fairly obvious. Left turn, straight, right turn. With straight selected, you just pick a straight section length. None of the curve arc radius tools will do anything. Likewise, when you select a left or right curve, the straight parameter won't do anything. That's because curved segments are defined by arc and radius, and the length of the curve is a result of those two combined. Curve arc defines the amount a curve turns from start to end, up to a 45-degree turn. I've picked these values to match with the rotations used in the game when you use the M and N keys. The game uses 32 different orientations which means each one is equivalent to 11.25 degrees. And then if you use the Shift M and N keys, it breaks each one of those down into 10 smaller divisions, hence the 1 1/8 degree smallest measure. The radius defines how tightly the curve turns, and in turn defines the speed limit. Depending on which track type you select, the mod will calculate and display the correct speed limit on another plaque above the planner. The minimum radius is set to 60 meters, regardless of what you select, as the game won't allow for a tighter turn than that. Now, radius is split down into thousands, hundreds, and 5-meter increments. So if you want, say, a radius of 1,500 meters, you'd have to select 1,000, 500s, and 0 5-meter increments. Basically, the larger the radius, the more ground it'll cover for the same arc. There's an info section down the bottom here that tells you the minimum radius to keep each track type's maximum speed limit. So anything below those values will start to drop below 120 kilometers per hour or 300 respectively. Height should be fairly obvious. This sets the starting height of the track segment above or below the mouse pointer. You don't set the height at the end, as that's calculated from the combination of chosen gradients and the overall length of a segment to ensure that the gradient you pick is exactly correct. I've split the height settings out into 10-meter increments and 1.25 meter fine increments. There's no particular reason for using 1.25 instead of 1 meter increments, except that it looked messy having 10 buttons spill over onto a second line here. Be aware that if you want to fine adjust to a negative number, say -5, you need to pick -10 and then add 5 to it. A key point here, if you find that you can't snap a section to an existing segment because it's too high above or too far underground, setting the start height here will help it snap properly. So if I set this to 0, you'll see this won't snap properly, but if I set it to -10, it will now find the correct snap point. Snap nodes will detect correctly somewhere within about 5 to 10 meters vertically. Anything beyond that, and you'll need to fiddle with these height settings. Then we get to number of tracks. Again, it should be pretty clear. It'll space tracks 5 meters apart to correctly match the in-game multi-track. For curves, whatever radius you select will define the inside track, and each additional track will obviously have a radius 5 meters larger than that. Gradients are also defined for the inside track and slightly adjusted for the others, but the difference between inside and outside is usually so small that any difference won't be noticeable. Each track has its own snap points, so you can offset them and branch them and so on. And then lastly, they're not visible here because I cleverly decided to demo this mod in the year 1900. But when catenary and high-speed rail become available, 2 additional parameters will appear down the bottom here to select between them. When they do become available, the tool will automatically default to using them. So be aware if you're at a later date and you want to use the older type, you'll need to scroll to the bottom and make sure they're switched off. Right, that should cover just about everything the Precision Planner does. I'll quickly explain the Rough Planner and then build a simple route with it. The Rough Planner is essentially just a big resizable rectangle tilted to the selected gradient and drawn as a bunch of translucent lines. The idea is to place it roughly in the direction you expect your line to go so that it intersects the terrain, and then you just follow the line of the intersection as you build the track. As a first step, you can use it to estimate the ruling grade you'll need for a particular line. I'm going to connect between Penryn and South Elmsall using a passenger service. So firstly up, I'll scale a planner to cover that distance and then pick the first grade, and you'll see it doesn't actually intersect anywhere from Penryn to South Elmsall. So if I pick the next one, see it's now actually popping out of the hill slightly ahead. Now, as I can't actually take a direct route, because at that gradient you'll see it goes straight into this near hillside, so we can make it a bit larger. We can basically seek around and find where the best approach is going to be, which looks like it's going to be around this hillside over here. The thing with that is we're now taking a longer route round, so effectively we may not need quite as steep a gradient to get there. So if we say we're going to start from around here, so we'd want the first leg to be around to the edge of this hillside, and then if we rotate this back around, you'll see we're actually going to, at this gradient, overshoot, which would be fine because you can just flatten it out if you get up there too soon. But we might be able to make it at this even lower gradient. So if I match this up roughly over here, let's place one here for reference. And now if we zoom in a little, now if we find a point around here and basically line up at the same level that it's intersecting, you'll see that actually if we now place this here, the route it tracks out actually comes in rather nicely just round the back of the destination town. So it seems like that's pretty much the ideal gradient. If we follow that 1.25 all the way along the terrain up to here, we'll arrive at the perfect level. So at this stage, that gives us a rough idea of where we actually want to go. So I would now personally delete the large-scale ones, keep in mind where it is that I'm heading, and fill it in with smaller rough planners. So let's pick some arbitrary size, say 600-meter steps, make it a little smaller. So we're going to be heading off somewhere around here, so if the station fits in here, it's probably going to be about level just here. So let's throw one down there. Basically, as the gradient should roughly match up until the point where you turn like maybe 30, 45 degrees off of the direction of the planner, at which point you're going to be running perpendicular to the grade. So you want to avoid that if possible. Try and keep the planners lined up with the direction you're going. So if we rotate this one here and throw it in about there, and then this is pretty much the process then. You just find the end of one, align up with where it's going to intersect the next one approximately, and throw that one down. And again. So then we're going to get into a bit rougher terrain around here. This is where it is probably going to require a few tunnels and cutting corners. So yeah, it looks like we'd probably end up cutting this spur off with a tunnel or a fairly steep cutting. This little outcrop will probably not be worth going around, so I imagine we'd just go straight through that. And then we're into easy terrain again. and then quite a sharp curve around here, so let's maybe make this a little smaller so we can fine-tune it. We're probably going to be cutting through this little embankment here, somewhere around here, and by then we'd want to flatten out anyway, so we'd pretty much want to, yeah, by this point we're probably just going to be eyeballing it, so that will probably work for now. And there you see, it's a little hard to see from up here, but we've pretty much mapped out our route to follow. So at this point we switch back to our planner, and let's get started actually plotting a route out. Now we're going to need a pretty tight turn out of here, and we're going to want to start from flat and switch up to 1.25, and then every other piece will be 1.25 to 1.25 until the end. You're going to need a right turn. If the station is going to be heading in this way somewhere, and let's just start this with a straight placeholder piece so we know where we're going to put the station. So it's going to be a 160 meter station, so that should do about right. And point it in this way so we've got enough less curvature to have to deal with. That should be about right there. So then let's get going. Although I just forgot to make this flat, but it doesn't really matter for now, it's only a placeholder piece. Okay, right. Starting flat, moving up to 1.25, and we're going to need to turn quite a corner. That's going to go straight into the hillside, so we're going to need knock this way back. So yeah, I reckon 200 meters is probably going to get us around the corner. So that's not too bad, 80 kilometers per hour. In fact, that's actually a bit too much, so let's bulldoze that. Let's try 250. It's about, nearly forgot. 1.25 to 1.25, must keep them gradients consistent. Now we're going to be heading off over this way slightly, so it's probably not too much curve. Right, and then provided we keep we don't have to worry now about the gradients, provided we keep them 1.25 both ends, we should just follow our way up the hillside without drifting too far off where these planners are. So now we're going to need a much wider left curve. So let's whack this up to 1,000 meter radius, longer. Probably stand to go a little longer still. That's about right. So you see we're going to do a fairly deep cutting through there, but probably wouldn't require a tunnel. Probably half of that. I think we'll get away with a cutting here as well. That's going to be almost a straight, but very slight right-hander. I reckon we could whack this up to pretty high, even higher. Yeah. And as I've said before, the higher you go with the radius, the more ground each arc will cover. So at this point, 11.25 is covering quite a distance. So we'll knock this back down a little. That's looking like it's going to line up. well enough. Probably want to go for a straight segment here, at which point radius means nothing. We want to pick meters, straight meters. The mod won't handle level crossings, so for now let's bulldoze that and we'll fill it in later. Maybe 400 meters, and then we'll start curving off. Right-hander. And we're going to start dropping back down and boosting this back up. Dropping that down even further. It's getting a bit of a serious bit of earthworks there. Let's try and widen it a little more. So is that going to be coming too far round? Probably not. Might end up with a bit of a deep tunnel. Maybe drop that back 50 meters. There we go. Right, then this is where it gets a little difficult. That is going to want to be tighter than that. Probably 400 meters, about 500 meters is probably going to be about right once that makes it further around there. At which point some of this is going to want to be a tunnel. So let's knock this back and do an earthwork segment here, and then as said before, I'm just going to use a tunnel segment just for the sake of planning. Work this way up. Is this going to be underground the whole way? Near enough. And you see, you get some idea of how deep the tunnel is going to be by where the ground layer line traces along the surface. So we're pretty much popping out the side of the hillside again there, so let's switch back to earthworks. I'm not going to use the tunnel guide for any of this because, like I said, I'm going to convert either side of the earthworks, either side of this, and then use the game to generate the tunnel. Right, so we're going to want to shallow this out a bit here. Too far. Probably going to want to curve in sooner than that, are we? Maybe not. No, that'll do. Right. Again, we're going to need to get a little steeper here. Much tighter than that. Much tighter than that, apparently. Yeah, so this is going to drop the max speed, but I don't know, if I was being a little more OCD, I might try and find a slightly better approach into this curve, but for now, let's just hack through there. It's not going to be too bad. 100, it's fine, isn't it? Again, we're going to have a tunnel here, so let's split this down into 2 segments. Tunnel. And possibly still tunnel there. Yeah, that's probably a bit too tight actually. Let's widen that out to 500. Or actually try selecting the right thing. Let's widen that out on the actual radius selector. That's probably going to be too far. Let's try 350. That's going to be about right. Okay. Switch back to Earthworks and much shallower curve. It's going to have quite a steep embankment off this side. That might actually not even convert, but we'll see. Anyway, I'll make this a smaller segment because we're going to want to curve back to the right at this point. Generally, if a segment won't convert properly later on, you can try, like with the tunnel, try using the normal track laying tools because they actually are slightly more forgiving with earthworks than the planer tool is for some reason. I don't know why. A little wider than that. And then we'll want to drop this down. Whack a bit of tunnel through there. And then probably go straight for a bit here. Very slight left-hander. It's going to be very, very slight. Slighter than that, I would say. Okay, and at this point we're going to want to actually work out a better approach to this town because that's going to end up with a very tight curve coming in. So let's go straight a little further and drift a little bit off from where the guide is. And then we can come in with a little bit of a more elongated curve from here. It's probably going to be about right. And then, yeah, then we can start making this come a bit wider into there. And then a lot wider into there. Oh, hang on a second, because we're getting near the end of our trip here. Let's flatten this out to a flat gradient so that we can try and tack a station on the end. Right. Yeah, that'd probably be a good angle for carrying a route onto another location. So yeah, it's probably going to be about right. Can join onto that road. Okay, so at this point, let's tidy up a little, get rid of these planners. And then we have a zero cost outline of our route that we should only need to convert, and away we go. So, bulldoze him for the moment because he was the wrong shape anyway. Right, let's get converting. At this point, I'm pretty sure I got it all right. Starts at 0.0 gradient, 1.25, 1.25, and I'm pretty sure the rest of the route is fine, but this would be a good occasion to go through and double check you haven't messed up the gradients anywhere. But let's get converting. Right, here's our tunnel point. So let's convert this one here. And because this is a single segment along here, it should match exactly and should generate us a nice tunnel. Perfect. And no unpleasant costs. Right, same deal here. Convert. Let's hope this one converts. It does. And fill in the gap. Lovely stuff. Right. Oh, that's still managing it. Yeah, much more than that, and it would probably complain about not being able to align terrain, but we're fine up to here. Got lucky. Oh, don't upgrade tunnel, upgrade this piece. Da-da-da. 125, 125. Upgrade you. And 1.25 to 0. So that should leave us nicely on the level for another station. 160 will do for now. Smack him down. Give him a street connection. Fingers crossed I didn't misjudge this. Whew, by the skin of my teeth. Would it work this way around? Yeah, expensive, but screw it. Done. Right, all that remains is to get a train running on there and have a lovely train's eye view of the route. Right, so actually this is a good time to mention you can't really do crossings or junctions with the planner. You kind of need to just put down the bare bones and do any track crossings yourself. But you can snap to existing snap points with it to do basic points. So if we just want to, for the sake of it here, make sure you get the gradients matched to whatever they were, otherwise you'll get alignment issues. But here we're doing flat to flat, so let's whack this down here. And I know this isn't how you should normally do it, but for the sake of doing it quickly, let's just whack a yard in here. And grab the latest cutting edge of technology. Stick a few delightful 3-axle cars on there. It's a pretty shallow gradient, so let's whack a few on. And oops, only one stop there, please. There we go, ready to roll. Right, I will shut up now and let you enjoy the scenery. So there we go. One consistent shallow gradient. The train easily hits and stays at its top speed all the way up the hillside. Planned out without any unnecessary terrain modification, repeated building and bulldozing, and wasted cash, except for those unavoidable costs to bulldoze the planners. If I work out any way to get around that, I'll patch the mod as soon as I can. If you do find any bugs with the mod and double check it's definitely my mod causing it, then please drop me a message on the Steam Workshop page. I'm going to be pretty busy in the coming months, but I'll try to fix any problems in a reasonable time. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope you find the mod useful and not too fiddly.